Hello again, Mangamatt here with the February manga update. Uh, Still working on the best of year list. I have it all written, and I just gotta, do it. It's been kind of hectic this February. With I spent 2 weeks down in Georgia for work related stuff, and I mean I thought I was gonna have all this time, but you know, all of that got kind of put into other things while I was down there. So really, it's been like 2 weeks away and not working on anything here. But well, I did get a little bit of reading done, so we'll kind of take a look at some of that. All right, first up, some of this is pertaining to what I unboxed from the Kickstarter. First up is Alabaster, volumes 1 and 2, which of course was part of the Kickstarter initiative to get more Tezuka manga works published. Now, this is I went over it briefly in the um, unboxing video, going based on what was written on the back description, but really a more detailed an interpretation of it is that there was a man who was initially James Block, who was initially sort of this Olympic athlete. He was black and from America, and during the time that Tezuka was writing this story, there was still a lot of racism, going on in the States, and at one point James Block thinks that he's met the love of his life, and turns out that the woman was only with him for his fame as an athlete, and she actually has no interest to ever have a deep, serious relationship with him because of his skin and his race. And so he, in a fit of rage, attacks her, and he's then sent to prison where he meets a scientist. The scientist explains to him that through his experimentation, which this experimentation also wound him up in jail, same as him, his experimentation was on a revolutionary device that would make people invisible, and that he had actually managed to perfect it before he was sent to jail. And he sort of tells him about this, and James happens to get enough info out of the doc to then find the device himself and use it on himself to enact revenge. Very similar to, I guess, kind of the Invisible Man story by, I believe, H.G. Wells, was it? Yeah. And the only problem is, of course, the device doesn't make him completely invisible. It only makes his skin invisible. So he adopts the persona Alabaster because of the pale complexion he gets because of his lack of natural skin tone. And you can then see sort of like veins and a lot of just that below skin kind of stuff, really kind of disturbing look. And he then kind of gets sort of this castle, and he still has the ray gun, and he, instead of using it to make himself invisible, the ray gun has a side effect of, if somebody is exposed to it too much, anything living, that they die from exposure. And so he actually goes around and he starts killing people as a part of his revenge plot. And of course, because they're invisible, they of course don't leave much of a body to be examined. Now, opposed to this then is a small girl named what's her name? Ami. Ami, who is the granddaughter of the scientist. And Ami is the only woman, the only subject of his that was able to go completely invisible, aside from her eyes. Her eyes were don't go invisible, and because he actually used it on his daughter while she was pregnant with Ami, and as a result, she bears no lasting negative side effects. Pretty much like 99% invisible. Again, minus the eyes, which I thought was a nice detail. You know, Tezuka being both a fan of sci-fi and a fan of, and also, you know, a medical professional. He, I guess, understood one of the common complaints of anything of people turning invisible in sci-fi, of the fact that you know, if you go completely invisible, then you're also effectively blind, because of course vision is based on light hitting the back of your retina and your rods and cones in the back of your eyes. And of course, if you're invisible, the light is going straight through you, therefore you can't see. But of course, Ami, who still has her eyes even when she's invisible, even though she's invisible, means that she, of course, can see. And it kind of goes from there. There's a lot of these sort of elements to it that make it kind of this classic horror kind of idea. You know, Alabaster himself, he's very reminiscent of, say, like, you know, again, the Invisible Man, but also he's also similar to, like, Frankenstein. He does a lot of these experimentations. At one point, you go to his island and you see that he's also experimented on various animals on his island retreat, and some of it is honestly just incredibly disturbing to look at. Just seeing how, of course, he can make animals only partially invisible, because again, to make them completely invisible would kill them. So, like, you know, he experimented on apes, where again their skin is completely invisible. You also see here an elephant, where part of the elephant has been turned invisible. Lions and a deer that's missing, like, the upper part of his body. Just this is some of the literally the most disturbing looking stuff I think I've ever seen. Even at one point, Alabaster sends over like an entire herd of quasi-invisible horses. They're invisible except for their skeleton. So it's literally a skeleton herd of horses being led by Ami, who at this point has grown up into an adult, sort of warped in a sense by Alabaster. It it it's a shame that in the afterwards that Tezuka describes that he really didn't he really wasn't too proud of it. He thought that it was very nihilistic. I mean, I honestly think that it's a great manga story of, you know, that dark horror that you get from a lot of these classic Universal monster movies, like again, Frankenstein and Dracula and all those. It's a shame that, you know, Tezuka didn't really care as much about it as I obviously did, and I know there were a lot of other people that really cared about this, because otherwise it wouldn't have been funded via Kickstarter. You know, it's kind of one of those odd things that you find, that a artist or a creator makes a work that a lot of people identify and relate to and thoroughly enjoy, but the creator and writer themselves really didn't care for it. It's kind of an interesting thing when you find something like that. But it just goes to show you how great Tezuka is as a writer creator, that even something that he himself didn't feel like he put his best foot forward in can still seemingly be a very worthwhile and interesting work. But enough prattling on with that. Let's get on to the rest of these. A Girl on the Shore. This is one of the newest translations from Inio Asano, the same man that did Solanin, what is it? Nigihara Holograph, and What a Wonderful World. A lot of people, including myself, really love his stuff, and you know, it's a good thing that we got like Girl on the Shore and Goodnight Poon Poon that are going to be coming out this year to add to those. Girl on the Shore, it's very much kind of a coming of age story, I guess. It's about two high schoolers, a boy and a girl who you know, kind of get into a relationship with each other, and they both have these sort of problems. And again, they're entering into emerging adulthood. They're sexually active with each other, and they're also working through a lot of issues with each other. Like their relationship with each other is one of like a coping mechanism. Like they don't view each other strictly as, I guess, boyfriend girlfriend, and they just see each other as kind of two people uh that are just kind of figuring out what kind of relationships they want, and the relationship that they really want to have. And I thought it was a very good read. It felt very real. It didn't feel like it was pandering like a lot of manga stories like this tend to be when dealing with characters around this age. It never felt overly dramatic. It never felt like it was kind of this Dawson's Creek kind of phony-ish, drama for the sake of drama kind of thing, where one character takes something out of proportion just to create angst. Everything felt very real and genuine. The guy, he was going through stuff related to what happened to his brother and how that affected him, and the girl is dealing with her own kind of problems in how she's kind of creating an identity for herself, trying to figure out how to be her own person and not just be, kind of following everyone else's kind of lead. And it really was it really was a great. I highly recommend it to anybody. It never felt very manga-ish, so I'd even say like people that aren't traditionally fans of manga would probably really like it. The only thing I would warn you though is that there's some sex in there. There's some very kind of they don't sugarcoat it with any kind of, they kind of lay down together, and then it's kind of all fancy and frilly, and then they kind of cut to afterwards. No, they get busy. They get really into it. And so if you're not really into some very graphic kind of sexual depictions, and I'm not saying like it's porn or anything. I'm just saying like when they have sex, I mean he doesn't cut corners. He shows you what happens, and it's only a few pages long, but like it's there. So if you're going into it, just be aware that is in there. And honestly, I think it's better for it because because like that's how teenagers are. That's how high schoolers are. They are doing that with each other, and that is the age at which they really start getting into that. Maybe some are a little later or some a little younger, but it's definitely around that area. And I think that's probably the most genuine thing about it. But I highly recommend it. That was very, very well done. Let's see. Then next up, another Tezuka. This is from actually a Kickstarter project that I got later with Storm Fairy, which I am not done reading Storm Fairy, and when I do, then I'll present it here. But this is one that I initially didn't think that I got the print version of, but lo and behold, when I got my Storm Fairy in the mail from that Kickstarter, I actually did get. It actually turns out that part of that Kickstarter was getting Crime and Punishment in a print form, and therefore I got it. So here it is, Crime and Punishment, which is a very very excellent cover here. Showing London, or no, not London. This is actually, I believe, Russia. Russia with, again, you have kind of dripping with blood and money, kind of, I guess, showing what's really going on underneath the city and what really makes it work. And I can't really say much on the subject of the quality of adaptation of Crime and Punishment, because again, it's Osamu Tezuka, and while Tezuka, Tezuka expressed his interest in adapting Crime and Punishment because he explains in the afterword that there were a lot of stories getting adapted, like the Three Musketeers and a lot of these other sort of adventurous but otherwise for a younger audience classic pieces of literature, but nobody was really adapting into manga form a lot of these more adult and serious and seminal works. And so Tezuka thought that Crime and Punishment would be one of those great works of literature that more people should check out. Now, as far as accuracy, I can't really speak on that because I've never read Crime and Punishment, but if I had to guess, based on Tezuka's other adaptations he's done with other works, it's entirely possible that it's just as as just below the surface as any adaptation could get. Don't get me wrong, it still was a very kind of fun read. It's about a student named Raskolnikov, and how he goes to a pawnbroker to get rid of an old watch for some money, but he winds up murdering the pawnbroker, and then someone else gets pinned for his crime, for the murder, and then it also leads to various investigators finding Raskolnikov, and eventually finding out that he wrote an essay to the matter of saying that there are certain people, special people, that he believed were above reproach, that these were individuals that were the ones that were kind of the leaders, the movers and shakers, these people who would be above Crime and Punishment because they would be the ones setting the laws and setting the standards. Your Mussolinis, your Hitlers, these people that are kind of like larger than life and lead the other people into kind of a revolution or like a new era or something like that. And he believed that maybe not necessarily himself, but someone else, would be one of those people, and that you can never tell who's these special individuals because again they look just like everyone else. It's just I guess time and exposure that kind of reveals that. And it's just and also he kind of grapples with his own guilt over whether or not he should just run away because of the changing political climate in Russia, or stay behind and fess up to his crime and ultimately get an innocent man from being executed or sent to prison because of a crime that he of course committed. Again, like Metropolis. Metropolis was another Tezuka work that is very fun and interesting, but again, practically nothing like the movie. Lost World, again, fun read, but practically nothing to do with the Sir Arthur Conan Doyle work. Even his one of his great manga series, Buddha. I've heard say that it's only on the surface related in parts to the actual written or understood life of the actual Buddha. So it's very likely that Crime and Punishment also shares a very similar surface relation to it. The thing that really is interesting about it, though, is just a lot of the interesting kind of narrative liberties that Tezuka takes with a lot of his panel layouts. Strictly like here in the opening part here, where Raskolnikov is walking down the street, but you clearly see him playing through his mind what he's going to do when he meets the pawnbroker. And that's actually that's such an interesting kind of panel layout where you're clearly seeing him walking, and he's clearly seeing, you know, the events that he thinks are going to happen as they play out in his head. And it's so very, you know, you get it immediately, but at the same time, you know, I can't say that I've ever really seen something like that. And then also this other part here, where it's the same static panel layout of these 3 floors of this building, but you're seeing things constantly happening, you know, people going up and down the stairs, and the way that it stays static here, but at the same time, you're still following what's happening up and down the stairs. You know, this would be, it's just such an interesting kind of way of laying out a panel grids, where again, the panel grid is right here, up and down, but at the same time, you have the 3 different floors that also still separate out, you know, different characters and where they are in relation to each other, to show kind of movement up and down the stairs. It's really kind of fun and unique to see that. And that was kind of the neat thing that Tezuka would do with a lot of these stories, is he would play around with a lot of these panel grids and layouts to make something, you know, kind of fun. And he would kind of add, that's kind of the unique spin that he would add to these, not necessarily like an idea or something, but just he'd be kind of like, it'd be kind of neat how to do this particular story like that. Or, you know, this part where he kind of describes, you know, temptation as being a moth being attracted to a flame, and he actually draws, you know, this moth that's being sort of seduced by the flame in kind of this coy manner, and then the flame actually, you know, reaching out and snatching the moth and eating it. You know, that's very classic Disney kind of way. I could definitely see like Disney doing something like that in a animated short or something. And of course, you know, Tezuka was heavily influenced by a lot of animated Disney works. So, you know, I liked Crime and Punishment. I'm not going to say it's like my favorite Tezuka work, but for a very early Tezuka work, I believe it was, still holds up pretty good. Next up, we have Seven Deadly Sins, Volume 9 and Volume 12. I totally forgot that I didn't have Volume 9, and I just got Volume 8, and then I guess I jumped straight to 10 and 11, and oh, big surprise, I didn't know what was going on during that whole fight scene, and well, that's why. Same thing happened with Toriko. I just went one small brief interim, not keeping up with the volumes, and then I wind up skipping one. But you know, it happens. It's hard for me to remember exactly what happened because I read these, you know, earlier in the month, and that's always kind of a mistake, reading something earlier in the month and then kind of forgetting about it as the month kind of trickles on. This is still kind of, you know, this large kind of battle between the Seven Deadly Sins and Hendrickson, who's kind of the main sort of knight that they're all fighting, and Hendrickson, who himself has been again toying with you know, demon blood to create sort of a more powerful group of holy knights, and himself kind of you know, gaining unlimited power or something like that. Mostly it's just a way to kind of see more of Meliodas and him kind of getting tempted by his own demon blood and his own almost unchecked power and sort of combating that against Hendrickson as Hendrickson fully embraces his demon powers. So I still enjoy Seven Deadly Sins for kind of that high fantasy shonen type action. And again, I really like the detailed artwork in it. Let's see. Next up, Ooku, The Hidden Chambers, Volume 11, which this one actually does a lot to sort of. There's some interesting plot developments here, specifically. Well, let's see. Ianari, who is the first male shogun in Generations, and the fact that Ianari has basically kind of been given sort of a puppet position in the royalty. It's you get to see kind of what has happened from generations of only female shoguns in this sort of alternate history, and it's essentially created this stigma that women are more capable of ruling than men. Men are kind of seen as sort of incompetent. They can't be trusted with these important duties. It's kind of like one of those social commentaries where women wouldn't necessarily run things better if they were in charge, but just that it would eventually get to the point if it was a completely female-centric society that there would eventually create this sexism within that culture against men. Exactly how in a lot of cultures there's a sexism geared around women, and it's kind of one of these like they're not better, they're not worse, it's just exactly the same. It would all go to the exact same conclusion, and neither side is right in that kind of depiction. But what's also interesting in this volume is actually Ianari, who he actually sees the true importance of what was being done with the Holland studies in the research and development of a vaccine to inoculate the males of Japan against the red-faced pox. And specifically, the fact that Ianari himself would have probably died from it had he not been inoculated as a child, and then became immune to it, only suffering a mild form of the disease. But of course, the problem with trying to start it back up again is the fact that even getting a mild case of the red-faced pox presents the problem that there's that very small % chance that a man could actually die from it. And of course, if another male dies, specifically someone of a high social class, that it'd be stricken from any practice the same as it did before. But it turns out there's actually been some breakthrough in that they discovered that what was hinted at very early in the series was that bears get a very similar case of red-faced pox, and that actually getting the pustules from a bear can actually, and then inoculating men with it, they actually get no symptoms because it's so mild, and because the illness that the bears get is so close to what men get, that they also never get a case of red-faced pox, which again is very in line with the real-life case of how milkmaids would generally never catch smallpox, because they would at one point catch cowpox, and cowpox was a very similar disease to smallpox, and that led to the practice of inoculating people with cowpox to prevent them from getting the much more severe and deadly smallpox. So it plays on a lot of these ideas that were actually used in real life to create kind of this more realistic how it would play out if this actually happened, alternate reality in which, again, women are in charge of a lot of the predominantly male-dominated social status in ancient feudal Japan. Again, I absolutely love this series. I think it's a great. I think it's very detailed in kind of how Yoshinaga lays out the plot and the characters and how all of them, get fleshed out. She's not afraid to spend a lot of time on a character that may or may not make it even through a single volume of a series. So you get invested in all of them, and you get anxious to find out what their eventual fate is going to be. So again, I highly recommend it for anybody that loves drama. But again, there's not much action. There's not much sex. It's just a lot of dialogue and a lot of interplay with characters. Genshiken second season, volume 7, which I can't even. The problem is I left this off of last update, and I can't even remember really what happened in this volume, other than there's more angst going on with Madarame, who's kind of the main nerd, the only carryover from the first series, and all of the various kind of women and one man who are all kind of inadvertently vying for Madarame's attention, in sort of almost kind of joking kind of fashion. It's played up for a lot of laughs, and I think it's a lot of fun. I still enjoy the heck out of Genshiken, even second season, which takes a very different kind of turn, being that it's almost predominantly female-centric, as opposed to the previous series that was fairly male-dominated. Highly recommend that as well. Then here's Tezuka's A Clockwork Apple, which again follows that tradition of Tezuka works that don't readily adapt various works of his. In which case, in this anthology, we get one story called A Clockwork Apple, which actually has absolutely nothing to do with the novel A Clockwork Orange. A Clockwork Apple is simply about a small town that is taken over by this kind of sort of brainwashing sort of drug that's introduced into the rice stock, and a rogue military unit uses this drug to basically numb the people of this town's minds, and making them more compliant and easy to manage hostages for them to, elicit their ransom demands on the government. But a lot of the other ones include one story involving a Nazi lieutenant who is looking for this revolutionary kind of drug that's supposed to allow you to perceive time at a more heightened rate, which would, make you which would, in theory, make you a better fighter, a better soldier, being able to see things, like almost seeing in bullet time, basically. But you find out at the end of the story that seeing things perceived in a slower rate has its drawbacks. Then actually the second story featuring a female android who believes herself to actually be a real woman, and to the point that she actually believes that she's pregnant with her former master, after some rogue space pirates board the abandoned space station and essentially try to have their way with her, and sort of the interesting turnout of what exactly she is carrying inside of her robotic womb. Then let's see. Also, another interesting one where a caddy is actually picking up a man who explains sort of his interesting night, and the cabbie himself also explaining his own interesting night. The two of them just sort of going back and forth, each trying to top the other one with kind of their own crazy stories, their own crazy past, and what's going on, and whether or not they're both lying or they're both telling the truth about what's really going on in each other's lives. Then oh yeah, trying to remember this one. There was kind of this weird bittersweet love story that involved a woman, but there's a kind of twist about her and her multiple personality disorder that has some medical some medical truth to what's ailing her condition. Can't really remember much of the details of that one. Then a story about another story about a school teacher and her students who were taken hostage by some Vietnam War vets, and the kids and the teacher both learn a valuable lesson about the cruelty of war. And then let's see, and then the last story in this anthology, which is also kind of the weirdest one, involves actually there was another story about a revolutionary, a person who's a part of a people's revolution who's trying to assassinate a person, and how that assassination plays out, and who the saboteur finds out is working for or against him in the end. Another kind of interesting drama tale. The last story, actually, another sci-fi one, involves some astronauts who get a hailing distress call from a spaceship, and they decide to investigate it. Find out that the spaceship is inhabited by aliens, and these aliens, all they ask for is some water to sustain themselves. They're essentially kind of these blob creatures, but the scientists decide to not give the water to the aliens, and one actually goes as far as to just eradicate the aliens. And but one of the aliens happens to shoot up inside the womb of one of the female astronauts, essentially creating a kind of space STD. And they return to Earth, and you start to find out that a lot of the men from that mission are being attacked and killed by seemingly bizarre circumstance where all of their water is being sucked out of their bodies. Fairly interesting story with an interesting twist at the end. Overall, I really enjoyed A Clockwork Apple. It's a lot of these shorter Tezuka works that otherwise, wouldn't get released, but you put them in an anthology like this, and you create the perfect kind of feel and vibe for you get a sense that Tezuka, he wasn't just good at the long story. He could also write a short, simple story with a neat kind of idea behind it. Let's see, Pokemon XY Volume 6, which we get a little more detail about Team Flare's plan to get this sort of mystic tree that holds a integral part of their plan to create the sort of doomsday weapon. You also get a little more. You also get some interesting more interesting details about Mega Evolution, specifically that Mega Evolution can only work on one Pokemon at a time. And also, X actually gets a new member to his group, a Gengar, which he's given his Gengar, which I think is a little bit broken. I mean, he already has a Kangaskhan, an Electric, what do you call it? An Electric. Also, he has a Charmander and a what do you call it? The chipmunk thing, the grass starter. But you know, I think that you know, Gengar, it feels kind of broken that he's got like, you know, something that powerful. And again, it can also mega evolve. Uh, Pretty much everything except the Chespin. That's what it is. Everything except the Chespin in his team can mega evolve, which I guess, you know, since that was the main unique thing that was introduced in X and Y, I guess it makes sense that they would try to work it into the plot as much as they can, all of the Pokemon mega evolving like that. As far as like the only thing though is they haven't really explained why in universe that you can only mega evolve one Pokemon at a time per battle. You know, it's kind of funny that you know, a lot of the other, I've mentioned in some of the previous Pokemon adventures that Hidenori Kusaka has at least tried to give an explanation for some of the other stuff that wasn't really given much detail from the Pokemon games. Like he explains that there's a limit of only 6 Pokemon per trainer, and that was given by the Pokemon Association because it was deemed that a trainer could only give the love and attention that Pokemon need to have a healthy bond with their trainer. Like 6 is the limit. Any more than that, and you're neglecting somebody. You can't, you know, spread the love evenly. Which would explain why routinely Team Rocket, who cares very little for the well-being of their Pokemon, would routinely use like far more than 6 Pokemon for their nefarious deeds. Even other stuff like canceling evolution. They explained that in the Pokedex, it has this little button that sends out a frequency wave that actually inhibits evolving. You know, he gives at least some kind of detailed explanation. You know, maybe it doesn't work, maybe it does, but it's at least something to kind of give an explanation. And he hasn't really given an explanation as to why you can't mega evolve more than one Pokemon at a time, other than I guess that the Mega Evolution bracelet can only work if the stone that corresponds to the Pokemon is set in the notch, and that you can't just swap it out. I guess like when you swap it out, you cancel the Mega Evolution essentially. It's about the only explanation I can figure out. With that. But otherwise, it's still a really fun series with a lot of neat stuff done with the Pokemon. In this, it features a Trevenant, the ghost plant type, one of the 2 ghost plant types from X and Y, which is a very interesting kind of combination. I haven't seen that until this one, but there were some interesting ideas done with that idea. About Toriko, Volume 32, which this was an amazing volume. Toriko going up against Heracles, one of the eight king beasts, Elite 8, I think. Yeah, one of the Elite 8 king beast creatures in the gourmet world. Just this giant nightmare, a literal nightmare. A giant horse that's bigger than anything practically. This thing, just like I mean, look at this thing. It's massive. You know, those little dots on the ground, those are trees. Just Heracles is in a league all its own, and also the interesting idea that the nightmares here, they actually eat air. So, you know, they'll take a breath and then that sustains them. And for Heracles breathes so much, takes such a deep breath of air that it's actually hard to, there's actually like low air pressure around the area that Heracles is actually in. And actually one of his deadliest moves is just breathing in. And he breathes in so much air around him that he actually creates a vacuum. And there's no air to breathe. directly around him. And then that also explains why the area that he lives in is the area where they would find one of the first ingredient, the first food item on the list to the to Acacia's uh, full course menu, air, which is a special kind of fruit that only matures every several centuries. And when it drops so much air that it's the only time that Heracles can actually even give birth to a next generation. But whenever anytime that air has bore fruit, that it was never enough air to actually make a very healthy offspring. There's a lot of this interesting na- ecosystem nature kind of storytelling, description and explanation for kind of how these superior crazy creatures work, that you really get wrapped up into that. And then also Toriko himself, who's way over his head trying to fight this giant beast god of a horse, and you actually find out that there's another kind of level of power that Toriko has yet to even tapped into yet. And also you get some other interesting little things like Mappy, the little frog creature that they've been teamed up with. He gets a few nice little shine moments. Overall, I really dug Toriko here, and also the first item on their menu for their full course meal that's supposed to completely revitalize the gourmet world and bring food back to them. And Bleach, volume 66, which again, it's kind of just rolling on. But I didn't think this was like a terrible volume, mostly because it focused on what's his name, Mayuri, the scientist, the crazy scientist, guard captain. He actually Mayuri Kurosuchi, that he actually fights against a zombified Toshiro Hitsugaya, which is kind of interesting. You're seeing like captain against captain basically, and that was kind of neat. And then you get sort of an interesting sort of fight with what's his name, the like the Squad Zero, which is all those top level Soul Reaper beings that Ichigo trained with, and also an interesting kind of idea in there, specifically with the one guy, what's his name, Itsu Nimaya, who actually has a Zanpakuto that's actually so fine and so sharp that no sheath can hold it, and he actually has to keep it suspended in a solution as his sheath, which is comically over the top for an idea, but it's kind of just funny in the sense that, like, a sword could be so sharp that it would actually cut through anything you tried to sheath it in, and so you have to actually suspend it in a solution as the only way to have any kind of way to carry it. I don't know. I thought it was kind of fun. Maybe it doesn't make a lot of sense, but Bleach, especially at this point, that's about as much sense as it's actually made, and that's at least kind of funny. And it still proves that, like, Ichigo is the least interesting or fun thing about Bleach in probably almost the entire run. Honestly, I mean, I wish I just knew where the end point was for Bleach at this point, because it's not getting better. It's just like, it's just on this weird kind of, at best it's just plateauing, and most of the time it's just taking little notches down lower and lower. I can't blame anybody for having ditched it like ages ago, but I'm seeing it through for y'all. and just to kind of see like how bad it can get. Then let's see, the final volume of Batman, the Batmanga, Volume 3, which this features some more crazy over the top 1960s Batman action kind of stories. Basically featuring like there's one story that was actually in the previous collection, the one involving Clayface, uh, the weird gangster that gets covered in this pool, that gets doused in this pool that turns him into sort of a shapeshifter, making him similar to what we know as Clayface. But in the manga version, he's slightly different. He actually turns into all kinds of weird creatures, which I guess I would kind of expect that more than just Clayface using it to try and disguise himself, or to just kind of be a puddle of ooze, or morphing weapons. I guess that's in a way kind of similar, but it's a kind of different take, in the manga version. And again, also other stuff like he's fighting robots. He's fighting one guy who is called the Planet King, who has various weird kind of gadgets that he invents based on the various planets. He also fights in the last one. This one weird. He essentially gets teleported to another planet where he has to fight in a kind of gladiatorial combat against other weird aliens, which is the most non-Batman-ish kind of story. But at the same time, I absolutely love seeing Batman and Robin on an alien world fighting against other aliens in a almost kind of gladiator style combat. Just and them also essentially like overthrowing them. Weird aliens, psychic alien lizards. Batman's hitting them with a wooden bat, which I guess there's a kind of humor in that. Batman and Robin are trying to ride on this lizard by jumping on its spiked back. If you were ever a fan of like 60s Batman, or just you want to see Batman just in crazy adventures that are so far removed from anything you've seen currently. Batman, he's solving crimes, or he's dealing with some kind of angst. Woe is me, my parents are dead, blah blah blah. No, you want to see like how far removed Batman can get from that detective aspect, and more into the Silver Age version, where Batman was really more of a scientist, and kind of a more deductive, and kind of eccentric in some ways. Definitely pick up the Batmanga. It's some of the most weird imaginative stuff out there that you can get for cheap. I think it's wonderful. Next up is Brave Dan, which is yet another Osamu Tezuka Kickstarter funded work, which features a small boy who teams up with a tiger, and they're trying to track down this ancient treasure that the boy's parents were a part of the culture of their people. Um, the ancient Ainu people, which are I believe an actual real indigenous people of Japan. Like that was the group of people before their culture was essentially wiped out, and you essentially got what was then established as basically modern Japan. Like before that point, it's similar, I guess, in ways to how American settlers came in and sort of supplanted the Native Americans. You had the Native Americans, and then European settlers came in and basically snubbed out that entire uh, culture. except I'm not 100% sure how it worked in Japan's history, how that played out. But essentially, that's kind of the people that are whose treasure it is that are trying to be found. And of course, you have Kotan, who is a descendant of the Ainu people, and Kotan is trying to find the lost keys, these three lost keys that will reveal an ancient treasure of the Ainu people. And to help Dan, he has to help Kotan, he has a man-eating tiger that was taken from a turned over circus cart named Dan. And so basically Kotan and Dan develop kind of a bond with each other, and Dan is even able to communicate to Kotan, which you know it's kind of odd. Like, I think, like, if Tezuka had worked it a little bit different, I think he could have gotten away with Dan never actually speaking in dialogue to Kotan. Just reveal everything through, like, expression and body language, to get, like, a message across or something, or to make it all kind of interpretive, or to even kind of, just make it very simple, like, sort of one word commands like go or stop or enemies or something, like kind of Lassie, in a sense. But in here, you have whole sections where Dan is clearly, like, carrying on whole conversations with Kotan, and it's just, I don't know, it kind of takes me out of it. I was kind of expecting, like, right here, like, Dan has a whole conversation with Kotan about kind of his distrust of humans and stuff, and I mean, it's one of those things, like, I really wanted this plot to be sort of more like a boy and his dog kind of story, and with a lot of trust and loyalty. And I don't know, it's like what would How to Train Your Dragon have been like if Toothless could somehow verbally communicate with Hiccup? Would that have made things better, or would it have detracted something? Like, I don't know. It's kind of overall. It's a fun little story, full of adventure and a lot of high action, high seas action kind of thing. They fight on a boat, they fight in a tomb, they fight in the jungle. There's a lot of different areas, and a lot of interesting kind of fights with Kotan and his sort of jungle fighting style, and Dan, who's just a big man-eating tiger. And there's a bit of mystery and intrigue with it. Overall, it's fun for a younger audience, and again, if you're a diehard Tezuka fan, get it. If you kind of want more of just the best of, I don't think it's necessarily a best story. I think it's just like okay. Then let's see. Next up, Inuyahsiki Volume 3, which honestly, this is kind of almost, you could almost read this volume. I'm sorry, I got it upside down. There we go. Huh. Honestly, I would say you could almost read this volume with nothing going into it. It starts with a girl and her boyfriend, and how they're sort of found by this Yakuza guy, and the Yakuza guy wants to just completely sexually molest the woman, but then out of nowhere, Inuyashiki, he flies in, and he's just not going to have it, and he does everything in his power to kind of help the couple, and it's really kind of fun how whenever I can find, like, a volume like this where you don't need any kind of context to sort of just jump right into it. It's kind of interesting, especially if I can just hand this to somebody and who hasn't read the first two volumes and see kind of their reaction to how it plays out. You have this old feeble man, and then you find out he's just full of all kinds of robot parts, and then he can just completely, decimate anybody he comes into contact with. And this old man is the one that's kind of the hero of the story. Very, very atypical hero. overall, I think it's fun. And then the final piece of this manga update is JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 2, Battle Tendencies, Volume 2, which this volume features JoJo meeting Caesar Zeppeli for the first time, the son of William Zeppeli, and really finding out more about the Hamon, and also meeting Caesar Zeppeli's instructor in Hamon, Lisa, who then works to train JoJo in how to master his Hamon, especially given that the other vampires, Cars, AC/DC, and Wham, all have been resurrected and are going to essentially try and find this ancient bloodstone that is supposed to be a key for unlocking the full potential of their vampiric powers, essentially giving them immunity to sunlight, which is the only thing that these vampires are actually weak against. It's the weakness of sunlight, and then the Hamon technique, which channels, sunlight into an energy source. And of course, a lot of diehard JoJo fans are gonna be upset that they couldn't get the actual naming rights for the three vampires. As you can see on the back cover, he's called SEDC, or SEDC, which isn't exactly ACDC, but given that, again, Viz Media is not made of money, and frankly, it's a miracle that these two arcs even exist in any printed official English translated form. You should really be picking your battles at that point. I think it's not that big of a deal. I mean, you read SEDC, and if you're familiar with the fact that there's a lot of rock band references in the series, then it should come as no surprise that they're clearly referring to AC/DC. And then the other character is named Wamu, so of course, it's Wham. And then, Cars is spelled with K instead of a C, so, Cars is Cars, and, just roll with it. It's not a big deal. I think it still works. I think that overall, for as intact and how well translated that it actually is, and a lot of the fun, and again, how well detailed the artwork still comes out, I think it's an absolutely wonderful read. Again, you also still get a few colored pages, which were a nice addition that we got in the this printed form right here. I really like it a lot, and I can't wait for the next volume of this, which will wrap up Battle Tendencies, to come out. And then we actually get to see if we ever get a Part 4 and on translated in the States. So that's also neat to look out for. Well, that's all I got for the February manga update. Guess I'll see you next month, hopefully.